Man, there's so many like crazy, just little aside stories that like I just for time I couldn't include in this. Like, there's a funny thing. There's a funny quote I sent my buddy where at one point he would, I guess because he was doing a lot of drugs and smoking a lot of stuff, he would go up to, I think it was Noel, like before a show, like backstage, and he'd be like, "Hey, how's my breath? Does it smell like wolf pussy?" And then Noel would be like, "Yeah, man, it's pretty bad." He'd be like, "All right, thanks." And so he throws some sticks of gum in. Dude, I swear to you, that's a direct quote in the book. And I was at work reading this, and I was just like on the ground laughing. And my coworker was like, "What's so funny?" And I was like, "I really don't want to say right now. It's kind of inappropriate."
Oh, my God. Yeah, I think we got our code open. I'm so glad I did not stop recording. Welcome to After Playlist, the music playlist discussion and reaction podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Terrio.
And I'm Brandon Lee.
Today's episode, we're going on a journey through the life of one of rock and roll's biggest stars, Jimi Hendrix. His music was integral to how rock would develop, and today Brandon Lee is going to teach us all about his life, his rapid rise to fame, his unfortunate sudden death, and what it is about his music that inspires people all over the world to this day.
Yep, I'm going to be doing that for you guys today. But of course, we love music and love talking about it. It's fair to you guys that we go and introduce the songs that are on our playlist for today. And a kind of a weird playlist. Originally, it was going to be kind of like following along like chronologically with the release order. And that's how I initially set it up, but it very quickly devolved out of that. I ended up including live versions because I wanted the audience to hear the difference between studio versus live versions, and that got kind of finicky. And it ended up just kind of being kind of a hodgepodge of some of just my favorite songs with a few live versions of different things thrown in here and there. But without further ado, I'm just going to read through the list. Stone Free, Hey Joe, and pretty much all of these are by the Jimi Hendrix Experience, his band. Hey Joe live at the Monterey Pop Festival, Purple Haze live at Woodstock, followed by the Woodstock Improvisation, also at Woodstock, of course. The Wind Cries Mary, the Foxey Lady at the Monterey Pop Festival. The original Voodoo Chile, Red House, Little Wing live at the Royal Albert Hall in London. Spanish Castle Magic, Voodoo Child Slight Return, and then Voodoo Child Slight Return live in Maui, 1970. Hear My Train A Comin', Castles Made of Sand, Manic Depression, Isabella live at Woodstock, The Star Spangled Banner from Woodstock, Power to Love live. That's from the I'm blanking on where that one was at, but I have two songs from there. Live at the Fillmore East in New York City is where that one is from. So I have Power to Love and Machine Gun from that live album. And then finishing off his capstone song at the Monterey Pop Festival, Wild Thing. The video for that is the capstone for the playlist.
And if you haven't already listened to the songs that we're going to discuss, there's a link in the description, aka the show notes of this episode with direct links to the playlist for your listening pleasure. We got them both on Spotify as well as on YouTube. However, YouTube will have the video versions of the live performances, as well as I think that last video is only YouTube only specific. Anyway, and finally, before we dive into the playlist and into the discussion, we have some few quick disclaimers. Number one, we respect everyone's opinions regardless of how wrong or awful they may be. Number two, it's hard to separate his music from his drug use, but we're not endorsing any kind of enhancements to enjoy his music. I mean, you can thoroughly enjoy the music sober. But
yeah, if you want to enjoy it enhanced, by all means, we're not endorsing it one way or the other.
One way or the other. Just enjoy it, ultimately.
Yeah.
And number three, we're not too bad about profanity. Well, Brandon's not too bad about profanity. I have a mouth of a sailor, so I may occasionally slip up with a cuss word here or there. You've been warned. And number four, we're just talking about the music. Just to reiterate what we talked about before, with number two, we're not focused on the artist's personal life or cancelable issues. We're just focusing on the music and how the music makes us feel. So, without further ado, I will pass it on to Brandon Lee for the deep dive. I'm so excited. Like, we both been edging on this. Like, this, I'll say I'm already starting. So we both been like edging on this whole week. Like, I've been trying to keep my mouth shut about certain things. You let some stuff slip out. I let some stuff slip out. Right out the bat, I truly enjoyed this.
Yay! That makes me so happy.
Yeah. So I'm coming into this blind. I love music. I love all genres of music, but for some reason, Jimi Hendrix is like kind of like escaped me for some reason. Like, I knew of him, like he's kind of like Bigfoot in my mind. like he's out there, but you never really decided to go deep or try to investigate that whole thing. I'm just like, okay, I knew of this black rocker with an afro, but at the time I wasn't really getting into rock like that, and it just totally escaped my mind. And yeah, this was definitely an experience for sure.
It's funny you say that, because I've asked a entire swath of people over the last week to 2 weeks if they're at all familiar or are even fans of Jimi Hendrix, and by and large, and this is people from like all age groups, from young adult to into their 60s, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, the answer I got, or along the lines of the answer I got from most people, was, oh yeah, I've heard of him, or I know of him, but I'm not really a fan. I couldn't name any of his songs or anything. I probably wouldn't recognize him if I heard it on the radio, but I know of him.
Mm-hmm.
Like, everyone knows the name Jimi Hendrix, I feel like, but a lot of people, especially nowadays, like, just, I guess unless you're like really into, because I do feel like he is a like guitarist, musician first and foremost. If you're someone who like you personally play guitar and like what all goes into that, or even if you're just in a band and you're intimately familiar with your other band member who's you see struggle on the guitar sometimes, and that can kind of give you perspective on it. But definitely seems like, from my experience at least, that's the majority of people who kind of like know him more intimately nowadays, is people that are they've sat there with their own guitar and they've listened to his tunes and tried to play along to him or whatever.
Yeah. So I've always been kind of somewhat familiar with, like, I knew the phrase Purple Haze and I knew Jimi Hendrix. Like, those two went together. I don't know why, but I just knew. Like, it just, when you see Purple Haze, you automatically think Jimmy. When you see Jimmy, you automatically think of Purple Haze. And I can't tell you when I actually heard the song for the first time, other than recently.
Yeah, part of that is, as I'll get into here, I'm going to do kind of an abridged life story for him here in just a second. But part of that is because he really only had a 4-year career.
Oh, really?
Before his sudden passing. I mean, as far as like 4 years of like actually being like the Jimi Hendrix we're kind of talking about today, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, he spent a good chunk of his youth growing up, like, to get to that point. But as far as like actual critical acclaim, yeah, only 4 years, which is a blip, man, really, in the big picture grand scheme of things. So like, that's definitely part of it, even though his influence has been such like long reaching. He doesn't have like a huge body of work necessarily. That's part of the reason why there's so many different live versions, because he did get recorded at these live events a ton, and the quality wouldn't always be great, so those tapes would be shelved. And then 25 years after his passing, because just of the mythos that is Jimi Hendrix, you get all these like posthumous anniversary release live version albums and whatnot. So many people have over the years found different like bootleg tapes of where he was just jamming in a club randomly somewhere, didn't even get paid to do, and stuff like that. So like his to some extent, his I don't want to say mythos again, but like his legendary tale like keeps being, put out from that. But at the same time, that's not like an actual album that was like studio produced you can sit down and listen to. So it's a little different, a little weird. I kind of get why there's not a lot of people that are still like big fans jamming out to him today, but there definitely is still whole world of people, the whole world over people are still his fan and still are inspired by him. So without further ado, I'm just going to kind of dive into, and again, this is a very abridged version. Most of this information comes from a phenomenal biography called Roomful of Mirrors. It is by Charles R. Cross. It's a little dated just in the fact that like the final chapter is kind of like the book wraps up talking about like the legal struggles with his estate after his passing and stuff. And some of that's been updated since 2005 when the book was written.
Mm-hmm.
And just some of his views on like sexuality and stuff he talks about, you can kind of tell are very much 2005-esque, but still, again, phenomenal biography, probably like top 3 biographies I've read. Highly recommend if you enjoy anything I talk about today, or if you want to just know more about Jimi Hendrix, that is a phenomenal place to start. So he was born in Seattle and raised in Seattle. So he's a Northwest boy. Okay. Grew up dirt poor, like moved around a ton, hardly ever had like a stable like food to eat, would have to, beg neighbors and friends and like eat over at their house and crash at their place. Both parents, which his parents' names were James Al Hendrix. Everyone called him Al, his middle name. And then Lucille Geether, something like that was his mom's name. Before she got with his dad. They were both like by all accounts, pretty raging alcoholics. They would get into a ton of fights, split up, separate for a time, say that they were, splitting up for good. And then of course, randomly run into each other out on the street because they were still in like the same block, right? They would split up. She would just go to like an apartment or house down the street, basically. So they would still see each other. Basically the entirety of Jimmy's early childhood, at least growing up, they were, constantly separating. When they were together, they were fighting, both verbally and physically. His parents did have 3 other kids outside of him and his brother Leon. They were all born with birth defects, unfortunately, though, either from Lucille's drinking, Al's beatings, or a combination of the two. And subsequently, because of the assumed medical costs that would be with how poor they were, they knew that they wouldn't be able to provide for these children. So fairly immediately gave up the other children for adoption and signed away their parental rights. The longest child that they kept was Jimmy's second little brother after Leon, Joe. They kept till he was about 3. And he had an issue where one leg was longer than the other, and it was causing a lot of gait and like balance issues. And his mom, Lucille, took him around for a ton, took off from work, everything, really tried to see what she could do to get him like the medical care he needed, and finally like realized like, oh, I'm not going to be able to afford any of this. And Al like refused to sign off on, taking loans or anything to pay for it. So they ended up giving him up for adoption as well. It was a pretty sad day in Jimmy's early childhood. But he did have a extreme fascination with the guitar from basically as long as, since he was like walking around and talking to people. One thing he used to do was he would get the broom and like play air guitar, and would get in trouble because he'd be strumming the straw on the end of the broom so hard that like his dad would come around the corner and he would like quickly pretend like he was sweeping with it, like he was supposed to be. And then his dad would see all the straw laid out and would like whip him because he knew that he was playing around playing guitar again or whatever. He did eventually find out of the trash an acoustic guitar with 1 string. Could have been a ukulele. It's not 100% clear, but so it was a guitar-like instrument, at least, that literally only had 1 string, had like a warped neck. It was literally like someone trashed it for good reason, right? Yeah. And that was like one of the happiest days of his life. He carried that guitar everywhere. I've never seen the movie, so I didn't fully get the reference, but he had seen a movie called Johnny Guitar, the biography talks about, where the titular character is constantly carrying his guitar. Like everywhere he goes, he has the guitar just on his back. And so he sort of just, everywhere he went, he had that broken guitar with 1 string just strung around on his back. Like he brought it to school. He would go and like listen to friends and like neighbors and stuff to be playing music, and like just with literally this 1 string, trying to just, how much music can I make with this 1 string?
Wow, just playing the same note over and over and over.
Just so like his journey, his strive to like fully understand the instrument literally starts like as soon as he has the instrument in his hand. He's able to actually work with it. He's trying to figure it out, unlock all of its secrets, so to speak. Unfortunately, whenever he's just 15 years old, his mom passes away from cirrhosis of the liver. There was also some complications. They don't know. It seemed like her spleen had burst, and she was basically found like passed out in an alley next to a bar. There's contention that, it could have been like, I was in the biography, I think he talks about one doctor stated that like the spleen wouldn't have just burst, like it would have had to be from trauma. So she could have gotten a fight or something, but they don't know. She wasn't, if she knew, she didn't tell before she passed. So one of his most autobiographical songs he would actually write talking about his mother. It's one of the songs I didn't include on the playlist, Castles Made of Sand. Refers to a woman in a wheelchair whose heart was a frown. Apparently his younger brother Leon straight out said in an interview that song is about our mother, that Jimmy had told him like after he wrote it, like, hey, this, in private, this is a song about our mom, Lucille. So just to kind of drive that point home, the song begins with a domestic spat. The wife slams the door on her drunken husband. Then another verse tells a tale of a young boy who plays in the woods, pretending he's an Indian chief, which, fun fact, Jimi Hendrix was at least 1/8 Cherokee. His grandmother on his dad's side, I believe, was like half Cherokee. Yeah. And so whenever he would, because he spent, again, they would move constantly growing up. So there was a couple periods of time in his youth where he would be with his grandma, and he would go back later on as a young man and stay with her for a time as well. And one of his favorite things, whenever he would spend time with his grandma, Nora Hendrix, in Vancouver, was she would always share tales about, Indian or Cherokee, like, I guess mythological tales and stuff like that, and like make up stories about Indian chiefs and stuff. And so he always kind of imagined himself as a kid, or liked to imagine himself as an Indian chief. But eventually in the song, the crippled woman decides to take her own life by jumping into the sea, pleading, "You won't hurt me anymore." But as she leaps, she lands on a golden winged ship. And then, of course, he ends the song with a couplet about timelessness, using the castles made of sand washing into the sea as, just nothing lasts forever. As beautiful as something can be, it's eventually going to wash into the sea. Mm-hmm. And that, even before I knew, because I was not aware of this connotation for the song, this connection to the song before reading the biography, it's always been one of my favorite songs just for the feelings that it evokes whenever you listen to it. It definitely has, like, as soon as I read that, it was like a switch was just like connected in my brain, like, oh, of course, that makes so much sense with how the song sounds. Yeah, love that song. So not too long after that, several months after that, because I think his mom died in like September, if I'm not mistaken, of that year, whenever he was 15. So it was like just a little bit, because then he turned 16 in November, and I think it was like January or February the next year, his dad finally got him an electric guitar, took out some loans or was doing like a payment plan or something. But finally got him an electric guitar. There's a story in the book where he like calls his girlfriend at the time. He's like, "I got a guitar." And again, he's been walking around with this busted one-string guitar for forever. His girlfriend's like, "You already have a guitar. What are you talking about?" "No, a real one." And he like runs over to show it off to her or whatever.
Nice.
So yeah, from that point on, much like his one-stringed trash he had before, he constantly had it on him, was constantly practicing, playing, going around to different people who played in the neighborhood and either jamming with them or listening and watching to them like play and trying to learn everything he could about the guitar. Like, it literally was his life, to the point where at this point his grades are not great, and it's largely just because he's not showing up for school. He's very truant, and the book talks about how he had like kind of a path he would go throughout his Seattle neighborhood where there was different like young adults and stuff that would be just like during the day like jamming out on a whole myriad different instruments, just whatever they had throughout his neighborhood. And you might go to one guy's house and he's got like a piano and a little bongo drum, and he's sitting there jamming out with them. He goes to another place and it's a guitarist and a trumpet, and he's jamming out with them. We go to another place, the guy's got a saxophone, he's jamming out with him. And he would just make these loops every day, just practicing playing music, meeting up with people instead of going to school. Mm-hmm. So his very first gig was in the basement of the Temple de Hirsch Sinai. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. It's a Seattle synagogue. And he basically got fired from that gig halfway through the show. Because they had a thing where like they played a couple songs and then they were like announcing each of the band members, and like each person got like 30 seconds to kind of like play out or whatever. And he just went way too crazy for them at the time. Like, even at this point, he was already playing like super flashy, over the top stuff. It was just being like loud and proud about it. So yeah, they, even before like they took like a quick set break, and he had brought his girlfriend with him at the time to the show. And after they come back from the set break, Jimmy's not up on stage. She's like, oh, I know he was like really nervous and like sick before. I hope he didn't get sick. So she's like looking for him, finally finds him out in the alleyway, and he's just like despondent, like, they fired me. My first show of my career, and I just got fired. And she tries to recommend, she's like, well, you know, you kind of did a lot there when they shined on you. Maybe you could play something more standard and just like, you know, kind of follow along. And he was offended, according to the book, hearing that. And he's like, his response was, that's not my style. I don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
So even from a young age, man, he was like, I'm not going to capitulate, and I'm not going to just like conform to what everyone wants me to play, because the style of the time was definitely like the big multi-person, I don't know 100% how to pronounce this, revue, REVUE. It's the style of like R&B band where you have like a lot, you have like, you know, 10 plus different backing instrumentalists and stuff all playing in like a big band or whatever. That was definitely the style at the time. And he just was not, he hated just playing the same few chords, you know, just in time over and over and over again for every song. It really bothered him. So that was our first big setback. His first significant band, however, would be the Velvet Tones. It was formed with piano player Robert Green and tenor sax player Luther Arab. And they were, you know, one of those big traditional revue R&B bands I was talking about. So they had to dress a very specific way and like play very specific songs. But it was like his first chance to like actually be part of a band that would like go on and play like several live shows and not immediately get fired for being too over the top, at least.
Mm-hmm.
So they had at least 4 guitar players, 2 piano players, a couple of horns, and a drummer in that band. And the dress they had to wear was one of the guys in the band said that they had to dress up and glue glitter onto their pants because none of them had enough money to go get like the actual like shiny pants that were like in vogue at the time.
Wow, you know what? I'm not even mad at that. Like,
no, man, arts and crafts.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, if you ain't got it, you gotta fake it till you make it.
You fake it till you make it, dude. It was, and they did. Well, I shouldn't say that. They didn't quite make it in probably that sense, but they did fake it on the attempt, at least. Mm-hmm. So one of Jimmy's like physical gifts was he had, and you might have been able to catch this if you were paying attention to his fingers in any of the videos on the playlist, but he had like some gnarly long fingers, bro.
Yeah. Like, I definitely caught that.
Yeah, like it definitely aided his playing just because he was able to reach around the neck to hit notes. Like he would play some things, like he would incorporate his thumb into like the playing and like the notes and chords and stuff, which is just, as someone who knows a little bit of guitar, is insane, dude. Your hand is so big you can reach your whole thumb around and use it as part of the chord. That's crazy. So, you know, even at an early age, like whenever he's first really starting out, trying to make it in the music world, he already has a gift. He's already like kind of trying to play flashy, over the top stuff. And of course, he's still, any chance he has that whenever he's going to any show with his band, he's sitting like front and center of the people who are playing before or after him. He's just like keyed in on the guitar. He's asking to jam like in between set breaks or after the show's over. He's like going backstage and like, hey, can we jam together? He's just constantly trying to be just a student of the music, of the instrument. And then we get to another integral part of his young music career, and also another inspiration for a song. So there was a club, I think it was a little ways south of Seattle. It could have been north of Seattle, in all honesty. It was a little ways out of Seattle, and it was the Spanish Castle. And the song Spanish Castle Magic is all about him going there. So he would go there to play, of course, a few times, but even before then, like growing up before he would like actually have an instrument or whatever, he went there a few times. Like him and Leon as young boys went, I believe it was to the Spanish Castle, and they saw Little Richard for the first time, and like actually got to like shake his hand and talk to him, you know, which then, a little mild spoilers, get ahead of myself, but years later he will end up actually playing with Little Richard, and the book actually wonders if they had a conversation about that meeting early on at the Spanish Castle, because neither one of them ever talked about it, if they did. So yeah, just one thing about the Spanish Castle that I thought was really interesting was, because like most of the country, this was like, you know, late 50s, at this point, early 60s, getting into the close to the early 60s. There's still, of course, a bunch of civil rights stuff going on. Segregation is still a thing in large parts of the country. There's still very much a racial divide, basically everywhere you went. But the Spanish Castle was, while most of the audiences were white, there was, of course, a good amount of representation from black musicians and black just people coming to enjoy the music. And a lot of the music itself was R&B and jazz. Like even the white patrons of the Spanish Castle had fully embraced that style of music.
Yeah,
and the book talks about how several of the Wailers, and there's a couple of the kind of big R&B bluesy names from that time period that kind of started in that region, and so they were like the hometown sounds. And I guess just having the hometown pride kind of helped dissolve that racial divide a little bit, which was nice. And I definitely think kind of coming up, both before we started playing music and then getting to play a little bit at Spanish Castle, that is a huge part of shaping Jimi's views on race. Because he very much was like, he didn't really consider race as near important as the rest of the world. He thought it was dumb, essentially, that things were divided by race. After that, just during this time, he continues, whenever he's like 16 to 18-ish, he continues trying to find steady work as a musician. Like I said, he stayed with the Velvet Tones, I think the longest time at this point, but he's branching out, trying to do his own thing. He's working with different bands.
Hold on one second. Okay, so all of this stuff was happening while he was still in high school?
By the time he's like getting his guitar at 16, I think he tried to stay like that year, but that year eventually ended up like dropping out, or essentially got kicked out because he just was not attending class. Yeah,
but that's just crazy to think that, and he's doing all of this at like a high school age.
Yes,
that's insane.
Yes, and his band too, like all of his, like the Velvet Tones, like those were other high schoolers, like that he either went to school with, or maybe went to another high school, but he had met at different clubs or whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was definitely. It is weird to think about just how okay it was as a society at that time. We're like, oh yeah, there's this band of 15-year-olds playing. We're gonna see if they're the next big thing tonight. Like Exactly. It is kind of a weird. Just compared to today, I don't think you would see that very often. Like the most you would probably see a 15-year-old band would be like at a school talent show, maybe, or something, right? Not like actually playing
like at a club
for money at a club for adults dancing and grinding on each other. Well, I don't know if grinding was probably a thing in the 50s or not.
Look, grind has been around since dawn of time, so we're not worried about that.
But yeah, so this is definitely, that is something to keep in mind. Actually, I'm kind of glad you asked that. This is all, he's very young at this point, and very rough around the edges. There's moments in the book where he has like kind of a cocky braggadociousness, but overall, most people said he was kind of shy. And at least early on, he was still trying to figure out like what it meant to be a performer. Like that's one of the things he was trying to figure out was like, I'm starting to learn, I'm starting to get down the guitar. Now at this point, I've been playing for a few years. At least I can play along to a basic song or whatever, right? So he's still trying to figure out that. But however, during this time, he does eventually run into some trouble with the police. The story is a little vague, but on 2 separate occasions, fairly close to each other, he gets pulled over riding in a stolen car that he says at the time he does not know, he did not realize, 'cause he's like riding, it wasn't just him, he was with friends or whatever, because he didn't have a license, but he said he did not know that they were stolen. He just got in, he was offered a ride and got in, right? But again, a black man committing a crime in the 50s was...
Exactly.
It is what it is. But they had, at the time, to get out of, especially if it was like kind of I don't know if that would be considered a misdemeanor, probably not. But if it was like not like a minor, if it wasn't like murder, right? If it was more of a minor crime or whatever, you could get out of it. You could plea out of it by agreeing to join the armed service as part of your plea deal, and you would agree to join for whatever the term was. So that's what he does, being faced with prison or having to like literally skip town and become like a wandering homeless person throughout the country. He decides to enlist in the armed forces. He does originally like the armed forces, but he, after just like a few months after he's out of basic training or whatever, his goal was to get to the 101st Airborne, because that was like the one of the divisions that like stormed Normandy, and they have like a historic reputation, and he wants to be part of that. Because at this point, I'm not really touched on it, but he really doesn't like, from a young age, he's kind of been like an outsider. He's not really like super well fit in. He had a stutter. He's always been kind of soft spoken, and he never really, the book mentions it a few times that like his speech, he didn't always follow like the colloquial like speech that his friends and stuff would use. Like he would speak like more proper. He wouldn't always use to slang and stuff like that. Or if he would use slang, it would be like, because he was big on like sci-fi comics and stuff, he would use like slang from that. So it always just kind of made him an outsider. So whenever he joined the Army and joined the 101st Division, he, for the first time, for a moment at least, kind of felt like, oh, you know, all of the structure and all of the rules and everything, I kind of feel like this is a place where I can actually belong, right? But his dad, just a few months into his contract, mails him his guitar. And that was kind of the beginning of the end for his military service. He starts playing in different bands with Army buddies. Every time they're like on leave or whatever, or allowed to leave the base, he's with his Army band, in quotes, is like going to different clubs around the area and trying to play and whatnot. And eventually decides, I'm done with this Army stuff. I gotta get out. I gotta go chase my dream of playing music again. And the way of getting out, just another sign of the times, was he starts pestering the like base psychologist, saying that he is having homosexual thoughts about his like bunkmates, and is having like all these issues. So when he entered the Army, he'd undergone a thorough physical, and the only problem noted on his evaluation was that he stuttered in the past. However, upon leaving, he had checked on the exact same form. He had checked 7 different maladies, ranging from chest pains to homosexual. And in his medical records, Captain Halbert typed homosexual, masturbating, dizziness, pain and pressure in the left chest, loss of weight, frequent trouble sleeping, and personal problems as reasons why he should be medically discharged out of the Army. And he got it. He got medically discharged. Wow. There's even a story where later on, whenever he finally gets to London and he's trying to put together his band, which would become the Jimi Hendrix Experience. His first idea is to like call some of his old Army buddies, and he calls a friend who's still in the Army, and he's like, "Hey man, I really want you to come out to London and play my band." He's like, "I can't, man. I'm in the Army. I still got like 2 years left on my contract." He's like, "Oh, there's ways out of that. Just tell him you're gay." He's like, "No." If that gets back to my bunkmates, they're gonna kill me. I'm not gonna say that. No, leave me alone. Wow. Which I just thought was an hilarious story. So yeah, he literally lied, said he was homosexual to get out of finishing his Army contract. He was like, I didn't think to make a note, but he was something like, man, just a few months, like maybe like 5-6 months into like his like 2-year contract or something. Like, yeah, not even like a quarter of the way. So after that, once he gets out, the whole next year of his life, like practicing, I know I've already kind of said it a few times, but like really at this point, he ramps it up a notch when it comes to like practicing his guitar, to the point where the book says he went to bed practicing. He slept with the guitar on his chest. The first thing he did upon rising was to start practicing again. And this is also where he starts his first illicit drug take. He starts taking some cheap amphetamines to stay awake during the night, stay up all night, literally just to practice all night long. Which apparently these weren't like super strong amphetamines at the time. They were pretty cheap and pretty weak. So those probably didn't have too much of an like negative effect on his health at the time, but they did kind of start his prohibitive, I'll say, drug use later on. It would, because it's kind of the first step on that. Of course, everyone around that time, at least according to the book, and from what I know of the music industry, pretty much everyone in the music scene at that time was smoking like copious amounts of marijuana, and he would partake in that too. But again, he was so poor that even that was like kind of if no one offered it to him, he was not going out and like spending the few dollars he had on marijuana, right? So even that was like not something he did a lot. This is where one of the times where he went up during this time and stayed with his grandmother in Vancouver. For about I think if I remember, I think the book said like 6 months or so, and he meets up with a guy and joins their band, Bobby Taylor and the Vancouvers. This is like his first kind of like actual band since getting out of the army. I think he'd try to again, play to different clubs, try to join in with a few different people, but nothing actually like stuck for any length of time. What's interesting about this band, Bobby Taylor and the Vancouvers, was even though Hendrix only played rhythm guitar and not lead guitar, the lead guitarist was a guy named Tommy Chong, later of Cheech and Chong fame.
Oh, okay.
Yep. So this was the first time he would like professionally play with someone that would go on to be like a huge famous person, not necessarily in music, but still, this was his like first like actually playing with someone of that fame level, right? Which I thought was interesting. So then after that, he finally gets sick of Vancouver, though. Same reason his parents, before he was born, had lived in Vancouver for about a year, but it's at least at this time, like super white centric in the sense that there's a very small insular community for Black people in Vancouver at this time, but like 90% of the people of the population of the city are white. So there's just both his parents apparently felt this way, and Jimmy felt this way in his short stint there at this time. That like he just even more so felt like a sense of not belonging in that area.
One of these is not like the other.
And one of these is not like the other. Yes.
You're in Canada. Like, come on.
He's in Canada, and like I said earlier, he did just go there mainly for his grandmother, spend time with her. But eventually he decides that that's not for him. So he makes a trip, comes down to our neck of the woods, down south, and there was I want to make sure I call it right. So it kind of loops all through the like southeast of our country, but I don't think this is still a thing. It might still be a thing, or at least something similar. But it was called the Chitlin Circuit at the time. Yes.
Oh my god!
I had a feeling you might laugh at that.
Oh man!
So called because of the chitlin that was like pig intestines or whatever that you would fry and eat. It was such a well-known like southern like soul food type food for that time that this circuit that ran through the heart of the South was named after it. And this was like, of course, you're really tickled by this, aren't you? I had a feeling the Chitlin circuit, I had a feeling might send you a little bit.
Well, so here's the thing. Like, I'm familiar with it. Like, I know of it. I mean, I'm very familiar with it. It's just how you said it. You were so proper with it. It was like, I'm not sure if you heard of it. It's called the Chitlin circuit. Oh, that just took me to death. But yes, the Chitlin circuit is definitely a thing that also pertains to not just music, but it's pretty much you end up going through a lot of the backwoods, the country parts, and the southeast parts to perform, and that's either comedians still call it a Chitlin circuit. If you're performing just anything, pretty much musically, acting, there's certain people assume Tyler Perry came up through doing a Chitlin circuit as well. It's kind of like a rite of passage, if you would.
It definitely, I'd never heard of it somehow before reading this book. I'd heard of chitlins before, but never like this circuit that was specific to like R&B and blues musicians and groups at the time. That's pretty interesting that that's still around. And definitely, like you said, I mean, it really was like the book kind of goes into more detail about it, but there was like some, it was like deep in the South at some points.
Oh yeah.
And this was also, again, the whole country was segregated, but at this time, Seattle versus like Mississippi, two totally different like degrees of segregation there.
100%.
You did not have any Spanish castles in Mississippi at the time with Black and white people mixing, vibing to the same music. That did not happen.
No.
So there was a good handful of
like a whole bunch of like hole in the wall clubs and one horse towns kind of stuff. So
yes, and there was also just a good handful. The book talks about just like of stories of him like having like his first like kind of rude taste or like more brutal taste of like prejudice and bias just because he's Black. So yeah, he does the Chitlin circuit from the years 1963 through 65. That kind of becomes his entire life. Everyone, like his entire social circle, all of his friends, anyone he's talking to or hanging with is from this circuit, other musicians and people that are like hanging on to the groups that are going through this. He was in a band at this time, I think, or he like was like partially in a band that he would like mainly tour with as like their lead guitarist, but that was kind of like hit or miss. But the big thing to note, in my opinion, is that he toured as backup for a ton of groups on the circuit, and that was where I feel he got the most experience, like seeing a bunch of like professionals and not just seeing how they play, but seeing how the band is run, how a tour is run, how the traveling and again, going back to just performing it for different crowds, different places, different venues, and what that takes, what that's like. Some of the names he played backup for. And this is like starting out like 1963. Carla Thomas, Tommy Tucker, Slim Harpo, Jerry Butler, Marion James, Chuck Jackson, and Solomon Burke. Now, I don't know any of these names, but Solomon Burke in particular already had 2 top 40 hits at this point. So it was really his first like bona fide star that he backed at the time. However, he was unable to stay with any of these groups for like any actual like great length of time. The book talks about how one night on the tour bus, Burke traded Hendrix, kind of like one might trade a baseball player, to Otis Redding for 2 horn players.
Okay.
So he played with Otis Redding for all of a week.
Well, damn.
Yeah, or actually less than a week, according to the book, before he was fired for similar reasons. Said we ended up just leaving him by the side of the road. Literally, just had to stop. They're like, "No, you're not getting on the bus." Because he was too flashy, man. He wanted to play. He wanted at least a chance to like be the highlight, and all these big stars and stuff were like, "No, this is my show. You're not going to do it." So after being left on the side of the road, he joins the Marvelettes. I think they came through whatever city he was in at that point. He was like, he knew he was on the Chitlin circuit. Another group's going to come through that he could audition for. So he kind of just hung out for a few days until someone came through. And the next group that he got in with was the Marvelettes, who were opening on this tour they were on for one of his great heroes, Curtis Mayfield, who's one of the blues legends. I think most people who are at all familiar with like blues and rock and roll history know the name, at least Curtis Mayfield, if not any of his music. However, like pretty much all those other backing jobs, he was soon fired again after he accidentally destroyed one of Mayfield's amps. The book talks about how it was often on like traumatic terms that he was kicked out of these groups or out of these bands. One time he was sleeping on the tour bus, and a producer who was upset with him for something or another, probably again playing over the top and trying to take the stage or upstage the actual star, literally took his guitar as they're driving down the road and throws it out the window. And Jimmy woke up completely like freaking out and distraught the next day because his guitar was gone, and had to like borrow a guitar for the next couple shows before they finally just gave him the boot again.
Damn.
Yep. But however, his luck will change, or start to change at least, in February of 1964, and I think you will find this interesting, when he heard the Isley Brothers were looking for a new guitarist.
Okay.
So I did not know, you probably were not aware that he played backing for some time for the Isley Brothers, were you?
No, I was not aware of that, and I'm a fan of the Isleys, and I did not know that.
Yeah, I knew you were a pretty big, from our R&B episode, that you were a pretty big fan. So he met them on the February 9th of that year, 64, in their New Jersey home. And they actually watched the Beatles perform on Ed Sullivan, that Sullivan show that night, which is like their famous, it's like one of the shows that like preceded the British invasion of music or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So he actually watched that with the Isley Brothers in their home, which is kind of crazy. But by the end of that month, by March, he was a member of the Isley Band, and his first studio session was for the song Testify, actually. He played backing guitar on Testify, which would go on to become a minor hit for them. So that was really his first studio session, I believe. Like actually being on like a recorded song that was like actually would go on to do something, right?
Yeah.
Which is kind of big. He would also play, just wanted to note this real quick. He was on a song Mercy Mercy by Don Cavey. I never heard the song or the artist. I had to look it up. It's an okay song for the time. But that was his first song that he played on that was to break the top 40. Mercy Mercy was the first song he played on that broke the top 40. Again, he was just a backing guitarist at that point. but still interesting to note. So yeah, he played with him for a few months, went on, toured with him again through the Chitlin circuit or whatever with the Isley Brothers. It doesn't really say in the book like how they split, but later that summer, just a few months later in Atlanta, he's sitting in a restaurant with his guitar eating when someone walked up and asked him if he played. And the person who asked him if he played was Glenn Willings, who was with the Little Richard band, the Upsetters. Okay. So whenever Jimmy said he did play, asked him out, he's like, do you want to come audition for Little Richard's band? Little Richard hired him on the spot. One of his favorite stories, apparently, like through the rest of his life, essentially, that he would like to tell, came from working with Little Richard. Because again, the pattern kept repeating itself. He hated just playing the standard chords of a song in the background, out of sight, out of mind. He wanted to be a star, man. That's been his dream. His dream was to be a star. So he would constantly, they would give him like 20, 30-second highlights. We could like play a little solo, but that wasn't enough. So he'd constantly like play longer than he was supposed to and constantly like play out of like order doing that stuff. But one of his favorite stories was after a show or for a show, because again, this was like I was saying earlier, they had specific outfits, like they were all supposed to be wearing like certain suits or whatever.
Yeah.
One night, Jimmy, being the rule breaker he is, decides I'm going to wear my this nice silk satin shirt that he had is all like, lacy and flowy and whatnot. Definitely not dress code for Little Richard. Mm-hmm. And Little Richard apparently is like berating him after the show.
Of course. It's Little Richard.
It's Little Richard, of course. But Jimmy, whenever he would tell the story, would say this part like in a like Jimmy or in a Little Richard like style voice imitation. Yeah, that's what I was looking for. So apparently it'd be like, I am Little Richard. I'm the only Little Richard. I am the king of rock and roll, and I'm the only one allowed to be pretty. Take that shirt off.
You know the sad part is, like, without me even knowing that he did that, that's exactly how I pictured it in my head.
Yeah,
like those two battling it out, like who's gonna be the prettiest. Yeah,
because Jimmy was, by all accounts, even as a young man, like even before this, and of course at this point as well, but he was. Most people thought he was very handsome, had some soft features, had like a kind of a weird body shape, where like he had broad shoulders, but he had like a very, very slim waist, so he like came and tapered off, very slim. Bunch of girls talk about this in the book, so. Apparently he was very attractive, and again, Little Richard he's the only one allowed to be pretty if you're going to be with his band. So he plays with them for a good little while, like going into the next year. It was like March that next year, whenever he finally stops playing with them, at least for a moment. He joined another famous group as a backing musician, Ike and Tina Turner.
Oh,
yeah. So he played with them for just a quick minute, really. Until once again his flashy solos became, in quotes, so elaborate they overstepped his bounds.
Yeah. See, I'm thinking of something like, oh yeah, Ike and Tina. Yeah, Tina Turner. Oh yeah, Ike. Forgot about Ike. So I'm just like, yeah, that ain't gonna go too well.
Yeah. So he was pretty promptly fired from them, and then rejoined Little Richard. But he did not stay with Little Richard again because they just were constantly button heads at this point. And ultimately decides at the end of, I believe, 65, or going near the end of 65, that he's going to move up to New York and try his luck there and see what happens there. And he's trying to make it as his own. And the book even has a scene, like it's like the final like sentence of a chapter, where he's getting on like the bus up to New York, and he just sits in the back and he starts strumming the guitar. And the book says if any blues players were on that bus, the playing would have made their ears warm, because finally he's playing music that doesn't sound like B.B. King. It doesn't sound like any of his stars. It doesn't sound like Curtis Mayfield, anyone that he's like been playing with or comparing himself to. It finally is starting to sound like Jimmy, which I thought was awesome. Because New York is definitely where I don't want to say New York is where he gets made, but going to New York leads to him getting made. And I don't know, kind of in a lot of ways, New York is where he gets made, or at least the people he meets that lead him to his superstardom, he finds in New York. I'll say that. London is actually where he gets made, but jumping ahead a little bit. So once he gets to New York, there's a few things that like pretty quickly will change his life and his career forever. A brown-eyed girl, a Minnesota-born folk singer, and a psychedelic drug came into his life all on the same night. So he meets the girl is Linda Keith. She's a model, well-off, well-educated, Jewish, British socialite who's dating Keith Richards of the Rolling Stones. She randomly discovers Jimmy playing his like very last show. He had joined King Curtis and something was the band. He played with them for a little bit in New York, but they were like not doing well. And the show that Linda finds him, whenever she discovers him, is like he's literally playing for like 10 people in this club. And she like walks in off the street hearing him playing, like, who is this guitarist? Absolutely blowing my mind right now. She walks in and she's like, oh, there's only 10 people here? And she's like offended. She's like, this is a disgrace that this amazing person is not, you know, he should be a star. He's so good. So after a set, she invites him back to her apartment with some friends where they offer him LSD for the first time.
You know, as one does during this time.
As one does during this time.
You know, you want some water, you want some tea, you want some LSD, like...
Well, it's funny because in the story, just to show Jimmy's naivety at this point, is they asked him if he wanted some acid, and he was like, "Oh no, I don't really want any of that. But if you got any of that LSD stuff, I'll take that." Okay. Not knowing that acid was the street name for LSD.
Jeez.
So yeah, so he takes acid for the first time and ends up just spending the whole night just talking with Linda and her friends, but mostly with Linda. And they end up putting on Bob Dylan's new album, Blonde on Blonde. And just like completely, Jimmy had been a huge Dylan fan for years before this, but he just like loved this album, and he loved having this, like, again, she's a model, she's rich, she is dating a famous rock star right now, and you're in her apartment talking to her all night long. She has all these blues records they're swapping out, listening to. So that was definitely like a, what's the word?
Serendipitous situation?
Yes. Sarah is very serendipitous that he met this girl, and that is just was such a connection because she really like pretty immediately became his like biggest supporter. Would eventually like drag producers out to meet him, and that's how he got with Chas Chandler, who ended up taking him to London and let him blow up. One funny thing about his love of Dylan was there was a story. Apparently, this is like, you know, several years later after he'd already like blown up and was like a mega star the world over. He was visiting London again and saw Dylan in the street. And this is from like a friend of a friend the story comes from, so it's not super verified, but I like to believe it's true. And he walks up to Dylan. He's like, "Hello, Bob. Sorry to bother you. I don't know if you know who I am. I'm also a guitar player. I just want to say I'm a huge fan of your stuff." And of course, Bob Dylan, this was after All Along the Watchtower had come out, which was like, I think we had it on another episode.
It was on the cover.
The cover, yes.
Yeah, cover versus cover, yeah.
Bob Dylan loved Jimmy's cover of it to the point where like he stopped playing it his way whenever he would play it live and would play it Jimmy's way, especially after he passed as like a tribute to him. But it's just so funny to me that, of course, Bob Dylan knew who Jimi Hendrix was, but Jimmy was so humble and still like was looking up to Bob so much that whenever he walked up, he's like, "I don't know if you know who I am. I'm also a guitar player." And Bob's sitting there dumbstruck like, "Yeah, I know who you are, Jimmy. I love what you did with my song, dude. That's amazing what you did." And they have like a quick moment or whatever. I thought that was sweet. One quick, going back to New York, that was just a quick aside. One quick cool little story I thought was he did have a habit of losing his guitars. There's several stories where he would leave his guitar in a club overnight thinking they would be safe there and that he could come back the next day and grab it, because he was, again, kind of like, he didn't have like a stable living situation. He was basically couch surfing, living off of the help and generosity of friends and acquaintances. But his guitar was stolen. He comes back, he's supposed to do a show, and I don't think I mentioned this. He's left-handed as well. And I probably should have mentioned this at the top. This is a pretty important part of his story. He's left-handed, and for what he would do for most of his guitars was he would just take a right-handed guitar, because they didn't really have left-handed guitars made. I thought they just made them right-handed. He would flip it upside down and then just restring it in reverse. So all of the like knobs and the whammy bar and the tuners and stuff were like on the opposite side, or whether they were like up at the top. whenever he'd be playing, which was just interesting.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I felt like I knew about Jimi Hendrix, but I didn't know why that was a big deal. I just knew that like he was different.
Well,
like,
it's cool enough that he just takes a right-handed guitar, flips it, and like restrings it, right?
Yeah.
In this story, though, there's a story. He goes to this club. His guitar got stolen the night before. Someone hands him just a right-handed guitar, stringed for a righty. He flips it and starts playing it with the string still upside down. And he's playing all of his stuff.
Oh, wow.
This dude is so good. He can play the guitar basically upside down in reverse. Like, as a young man, like he hasn't even like made it super big yet, right? Like he's still like struggling to find himself.
That's crazy.
Commercially, at least at this point. So yeah, that kind of blew my mind because I knew about the playing. I never knew he could like actually, if you just handed him a right-handed guitar, I didn't know he could just flip it, start playing it. That's crazy to me. That's up there with like Tech Nine rapping in reverse during a live show. Like that's like crazy. How do you do that? How do you even begin to practice that skill?
Exactly.
So yeah, I had to include that just because I thought that was awesome. But yeah, so like I said, Linda, she tried to drag several different big producers and stuff to his shows, and none of them really saw that he was going to be a star like Linda did. And then kind of runs into Chas Chandler out in New York by accident, just kind of bumps into him. And he had played with the group The Animals, but had retired and was trying to get into producing. So he was like in New York looking for like his first big musician that he would be producing for. And he, of course, gets drugged to a show by Linda Keith and finds Jimmy and quickly decides like, oh, I really want to take you to London. I think if we get you to London, we can make you big. What would it take to get you there? And the only stipulation that Jimmy has is to agree to go to London with him is once we get there, you have to get me a meeting with Eric Clapton. That's all I want. So I want to meet Eric Clapton.
Okay.
And he agrees. And they go to London. And so I say New York is like where he met because Linda and Chas are really like the impetus for leading him to fame. But once he gets to London, it's like London is really where like both Jimi Hendrix as a star and his band, the Jimi Hendrix Experience, are born. Literally within the first day of being back, they end up going out to a club with some of Chas like flatmates or whatever. One of who would be Kathy Etchingham, which would be his kind of like on again, off again girlfriend for the next couple of years. As they're leaving the club that night, he unaware of like the fact that the cars travel on different sides in Britain. He almost steps out in front of a curb and she has to like pull him back and it just like barely like brushes his like elbow or something.
Jeez.
So they go back to the hotel or whatever, and they're sitting there, and Jimmy just very softly just decides to ask her on a whim, like, would you like to come back to my room? And she agrees. And so that starts their relationship. And perhaps like the most important thing about this is that Kathy was like a who's who on the music scene of London at the time. She knew everyone. She really like became his introduction to that. Her friends included members of The Who, the Rolling Stones, just so many bands, as well as like producers and other people that maybe weren't musicians themselves, but were in the industry. Like she had her hands, or at least that connection to all these people. So by proxy, her and her boyfriend were now friends with all these people. Like it's just so the whole story of him coming from New York, going to London, and just immediately meeting all these people, and just how quickly his career really takes off once he gets to London is so just this like kismet, dude. It's like the universe was like bending the laws of nature to make this happen. It seems like to me, like for real.
I mean,
it's so crazy, man.
I mean, considering how much he went through, as a youth and all the trauma he faced. I mean, yeah, of course.
So, of course, step number one is he needs a band. Right now, it's just himself. So they put out an ad, and he wanted to do the big style review style band again. He wanted to have that, but Chas both mainly, I think, because it was going to be cheaper. He wanted to have like 2, 3, 4 people. So the main two things they were looking for were a bass player and a drummer. Noel Redding, who was a guitar player. He sees the ad, musician wanted, comes out. They ask him if he could play bass. He's like, well, I've never tried, but I've never played bass before, but I'm willing to give it a try. So he jams with Jimmy for a little bit. And then they go and they like go next door to a pub and they're sitting there just chatting, getting to know each other. And what gets Noel the job as bassist is he had big frizzy hair like Bob Dylan. It was kind of like an Afro style hair. And Jimmy, again, just being such a fan of Bob Dylan, said that Noel's hair reminded him of Dylan, and anyone who looked like Bob Dylan was okay with Jimmy. So he literally got the part in the band because of his hairstyle, not necessarily his playing.
Wow. Look, you look like my idol.
But right,
you can join us.
That's literally all it took.
That's crazy.
And then they ended up getting shortly thereafter the drummer Mitch Mitchell. Mm-hmm. And there's within like the fan base, I was looking online to see what people think about like this specific band, right? With Noel and Mitch, and some people like it's hit or miss. Some people really like Noel and Mitch, and some people really like who he had later on in the band. I think like if you go back and listen to any of the live shows where he just keeps going and going and going, the fact that they were able to, on what in a studio version is like a 3-minute song, and then as a bassist and a drummer during the live version, you're able to keep up for 8-10 extra minutes of playing and like improvise with Jimmy.
See, okay, so I was gonna bring that up later on. Okay, well, I'm saying this without knowing much more than what you just told me. So I'm a big fan of the drummer as well, because the drummer was able to keep up with Jimmy. I noticed on a lot of songs where, you know, the song ended, but, you know, he has a little jam out session. The drummer's able to keep up with it. Now, I'm just now learning that wasn't just one drummer. It was more than one drummer. Mitch
Mitchell was his drummer for the majority. There was a small stint of time where he replaced, because he played with Buddy Miles and Billy Cox, I think, and blanking on which one of those was the bassist and which one of those was the drummer. But whichever one of those was the drummer was also like a good bluesy singer, like on Power to Love on the playlist at the Fillmore Arena. At the end, whenever there's like the backing coming in, it's like much more like deep and bluesy sounding. That's the drummer singing. But like shortly after that live album was recorded, he went back to Mitch Mitchell.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm assuming Mitch Mitchell was around for the Voodoo Chile era, right? Was that Mitch?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that was from his third album, Electric Ladyland, which I'll be getting to here shortly.
Yeah. He killed it. He killed it on this.
I definitely think I'm of the opinion that I think Noel and Mitch were phenomenal. Not everyone feels that way. Some people think that like Buddy and Billy would have been a better fit long term. We didn't have a ton of Jimmy playing with them to really get a huge sample size. But again, just the fact that Noel and Mitch were able to keep up with him because he did not plan a lot of those solos he would do live, man. He would literally, he was one with the guitar, wherever the guitar and his emotions and the sounds took him, he was going. And it was on Mitch and Noel to keep that rhythm.
That's it.
Keep it going.
Exactly. It's either keep up or be left behind.
So yeah, that kind of impulsivity, just going back to him just offering Noel the job on the spot because of his hair, would definitely mark a lot of different moments in his career. Just as if he felt something, he was doing it right then. He didn't give it a second thought. He was just going after it, for better or worse. So still literally in like this is, I think, 8 days, on the 8th day after arriving in London, to fulfill his promise to Jimi Hendrix, Chaz takes him to a Cream concert, which Cream was Eric Clapton's band at the time. Whenever
Cash rules everything around me.
Not that Cream. That came much later. But during a set break of Cream's show that night, Chaz because he knew, again, Chaz was connected. He played with the Animals, who was like a pretty big London, England rock band or whatever. So he knew these people, at least like tangentially. So he calls up to Eric's like, hey, can my buddy Jimmy, can he come up? He wants to meet you. Can he come up here and jam? And they were just so flabbergasted that one, again, like they were like near the top of that. Like maybe the Beatles were the only band like bigger than them at the time in England at least. So the gall for someone to come up and ask, "Can we jam with you during the middle of our show?" Sure, it's a set break, but still, they were just so flabbergasted by that. No one had ever done that, but they were like, I think the bassist or someone was like, I got an extra bass amp he can plug into if he wants. I didn't know what was going to happen. And he gets up and he plays a version of Howling Wolf's Killing Floor, which I thought about. I've never been a huge fan of this song. There's one reason I didn't put it on the playlist. I almost put it on there like 8 different times, but apparently I've never heard the like original. I don't know if it's like Curtis. I forget which blues player played the original song, but like originally it's like a much slower blues, and he gets up there and he is just shredding it. It's like at least 3 times the pace, and Eric Clapton is just like mouth, jaw hanging open, like, oh my god, who is this kid? I'm not gonna have a job after this. And in the story, apparently there was some very famous graffiti nearby in London that just said Clapton is God, right? So in the book, I love it. It ends like the chapter, or at least that section of the chapter, by saying Jimmy had been in London for only 8 days, and he had already met God and burned him.
Damn.
That's a hard line, bro. That's a hard line.
Oh, that's so gangster. I like that. I like that.
Literally, man, he's been in London a week and he's already like upstaging his like one of his biggest idols. And that would continue throughout like the rest of his life. Is he would constantly like look up to Clapton and like pretty much every other guitarist who was at all in the rock scene at this point was of course looking up to Jimmy, because no one was doing anything Jimmy was doing at this point. So yeah, he continues, they pretty immediately go on a big tour through like France and Spain and places throughout Europe. And they start working on making his first album, or their first album, the Are You Experienced album. He also has his first like press bio being made at this point, and the journalist, whenever he's coming over to like get his background and what all he's done before this, is like incredulous that he's played with so many big names in R&B and blues in his already like such nascent career. Like he's already played with, again, Little Richard, Ike and Tina, the Isley Brothers, just so many different blues people he's played with. Because there's several I left out. I tried to hit most of them, but there's several I left out that he played with, at least for a short stint of time. And at one point, while the journalist is there, they're listening to a King Curtis song on the radio, and he asked Jimmy if he knows the guitar player on the song. And this is a direct quote. Jimmy looks at him and said, "I played that, motherfucker," with a big grin on his face. Which is just great. I can just picture him laughing, like smiling really big, like, "I played that. What are you talking about?" Literally, the journalist feared that no one would believe the bio if he was 100% honest, so he like flipped it a little bit whenever he published it. During this time, he's writing all these songs or recording. One of the songs that I have on the playlist that was inspired and written pretty quickly in this time is "The Wind Cries Mary," which was inspired by a fight with his girlfriend Kathy Etchingham, where apparently they pretty frequently argued over her cooking was not very great, and he would always complain. And so she finally just had enough one night and like was like throwing pots and pans and stuff at him, and she ends up storming out. And so like if you listen to like the lyrics of "When Christ Mary," is talking about like, she's walking down the road and like he's cleaning up like when all the things get back in their boxes, and the king has no wife. Like it's talking, he basically wrote all this like that night sitting at home sad because his girlfriend left him after a fight, which is just great. However, his very first song, and why I have it at the front of the playlist, was "Killing Stone." The first song he wrote, rather. His first single he cut was "Hey Joe," but I did not know this until reading the biography. "Hey Joe" was a cover. What? That someone else did, and he completely like redid it in his own vision. Of course, added the 6 solos, and quickly like kind of made it his song. So I guess I was thinking about it. There's a few of his songs on his albums that are like covers that at least the book didn't talk about him having to like go and like ask the people first, like, "Hey, like if you changed it up enough at that time, it seems like you could just put it on the album.
Yeah. So yeah. Back in the day, copyright was not as rigid as it is today. A lot of bands, especially during that time, they will literally rip off another band song. Like if like somebody was coming up in the chitlin circuit and they got wind of it, they'll take that record and give it to like another artist, like Tutti Frutti and a whole bunch of songs by Elvis. He stole that from like Mama Morton and all of them. I think Mama Morton. I think I might be mixing the names up, but yeah, they were literally steal a lot of songs from other artists and just release it. And it's just a matter of who released it first. During that time.
Right. Well, it does. The book does talk about how, because like Chaz is trying to convince him at one point, like early on, to like start writing, because he mentions that with like Hey Joe, because again, Hey Joe was like, that was the song. Kind of jumping back a little bit. That was the song that whenever Chaz like first walks in, Linda's dragging him in. He's playing his version that he had just come up with, like not too long before this encounter, right? Jimmy had. So he's playing Hey Joe is like the first song that Chaz hears him play, and that's like the song that makes us like, we got to get him, and this song is going to like catapult him. But he mentions to Jimmy that he needs to write his own music so he can get writing credit. So I don't know if they're still, for like the original author of the song for Hey Joe, if they like give them writing credit. I didn't really look too much into that, or like how that all works. I know it's like where you were just saying people stealing and stuff, so they may not have cared too much.
I mean, and at the time they probably didn't, but I'm quite sure retroactively they probably went back and rectified a lot of those things.
True.
But speaking of Hey Joe, I will say this, and this is just my stupid brain, and I probably cut this out of the episode, but I just have to share it. When I first heard the song, I could not stop hearing. I think it's either the old lady on The Simpsons or something that goes, "Hello, Joe." Like I just keep hearing that in my head. And like, I'm
not even sure what you're talking about, but that is hilarious.
So she's like, "Hey, Joe. Hello, Joe. Hello, Joe." I just keep hearing that in my head.
Yeah, I've never really watched The Simpsons, so if that's where it's from, I don't have that reference, but that is quite funny. The memes we've shared with each other about that song in particular is funny.
Yeah.
Hey Joe, I heard you shot your wife. Yeah, LMAO guitar solos.
Right. Just start shredding the guitar upside down.
Right. So yeah, getting back to it. So they continue throughout the rest of like the end of 66 and going into 67. They're constantly going on tours, playing different shows, and basically every bit of money they get like from touring and everything, the vast majority of it is like, and they would do this like in between, like, so the book talks about they would go to a show and it'd be like 6 hours away. They would drive up there. It'd be night. They'd play. They would drive all through the night, get back to the studio like 3-4 in the morning, record for like a couple hours because that's all they could afford with what they had just made, sleep for like 2 hours, and then wake up the next morning to drive another 4, 5, 6 hours to another show to do it again. And they would just so they're constantly coming in and out of the studio and different shows and tours just all over London or England and Europe at large. However, no day in the entire history of the experience was as productive as January 11th, 1967. Okay. They spent basically all day that day recording in the studio, including, and most songs they would get relatively quick. Because again, at the end of the first album, they Chaz like totaled it all up, and they only had like 72 hours, I think it was, like total in the recording, which is like not a ton if you've ever, which recording takes a lot. You got to go back and redo a lot of stuff, and you got to get things just right. Mm-hmm. So on this day, they spent over 4 hours just working on Purple Haze alone, getting it just right. And then that evening, they went to go play a double show at a club called the Bag O' Nails. And what makes this so prolific as a day in their history was there are several versions of who all it was exactly in the audience that night, but at the very least, these were the names that are pretty confirmed. Eric Clapton, Pete Townshend, John Lennon, Paul McCartney, Ringo Starr, Mick Jagger, Brian Jones, Beatles manager Brian Epstein, John Entwistle, Donovan, Georgie Fame, Donnie Lane, Terry Reid, Jeff Beck, Jimmy Page, Lulu, the Hollies, the Small Faces, the Animals, and perhaps most important of all, a young Roger Mayer, who would later become his secret weapon and help him design a bunch of peripheral devices that he would use to create specific sounds that no one else was able to do because they didn't have a John Mayer on their team. So, yeah, that was a pretty big show that like really kind of cemented him in like the London rock scene. Had all these people showing up, right? All these mega stars. During this time, he was still in a relationship with Kathy Etchingham, but as he's like touring around a lot and stuff, his infidelity is getting pretty rampant. There's actually kind of a funny story where maybe it may not be funny depending on who you're talking to, but Kathy got like so just used to it that she actually walked in on him having sex with a girl in a public restroom. And she just sighs and was like, hurry up or we're going to be late for the tour bus. And then she like turns around to leave and he just calls back, she wanted an autograph.
Okay. You know what?
Yeah. So,
oh man,
I'm jumping around a little bit here, but so whenever he started writing his own songs, Chaz told him, just write what you know. So he literally, within like over the span of a night, probably over just like several hours, really, he wrote Stone Free. And if you listen to the lyrics about that song, it's very much about him not wanting to be tied down. And, you know, he's like a stone free. I love that song so much. They don't realize. Anyways, good song. But yeah, so that definitely came, or was inspired. The writing for that was by, I think, just he did not want to be like, even though he would also get jealous of like girls he was like, you know, quote unquote dating at the time, if they would be around other guys or whatever, he was constantly, mainly with groupies and stuff, but also there's a few other people, but yeah, he got around, right?
Gotcha. Hendrix was a hoe.
Yes, very much so, which was, you know, I think you read a biography of any big rock star this time, like I'm sure, you know, you read the Beatles or the Rolling Stones or Eric Clapton, any of these people that are like, you know, going to his shows and are like wigging out because he's so good, they probably had similar experiences and stories. I'm positive.
They call it sex, drugs, and rock and roll for a reason. So.
Exactly. So yeah, like I said, they were able to just kind of cobble together time in studio time in between gigs and touring, with Hey Joe being their first single. It was one interesting story was on the very first day of recording, their studio engineer, Mike Ross, was completely like baffled whenever they brought in 4 twin Marshall stacks, which was just like, to the studio engineer's mind, it's like, that's way too many speakers. Why do you need that many speakers? And so he goes up and he asks Jimmy, he's like, hey, do you want me to mic each of these? And Jimmy's like, no. What you do, you get one microphone and you just put it about 12 feet away from us, and that'll be good. And he's like, okay. And so as soon as they actually start playing to record, it's so loud that the sound engineer had to like retreat to the control room.
Jeez.
So that if you noticed on the studio like versions of that, like Hey Joe and anything from that first album, Are You Experienced, it definitely has kind of a rougher quality to it. And I'm sure that's probably a large part of it is just the technology of recording. Like Jimmy's, during his 4-year career, and especially a lot of working with John Mayer, which I mentioned just a second ago, kind of catapulted the recording technology in a lot of ways and how it could be used as like a tool itself. He kind of showed people how to do that to some extent. So part of it was just an experience, just recording it literally just with a single microphone, just 12 feet away. Like that's not going to be probably the best quality, I assume. But then also just technology itself was kind of limiting at the time for what he was envisioning in his head for what he was trying to achieve sound-wise. So just another string of people connected to Jimi Hendrix that would either were already famous or were going to be famous during this time while he's touring in Liverpool. A young Lemmy Kilmister gets like picked up. It's like a friend of a friend that's like part of the road tour or whatever. At first he's just being picked up just literally to like go from like Liverpool to somewhere else, but then like really gets along with Jimmy and the group, the band, and they offer him to be roadie for I think he's roadie for like a few months or something, but he would go on to create Motorhead.
Oh.
Lemmy was the founder of Motorhead. During this time, again, they're trying to cobble together the album. They finally get the album together, and it releases in the spring of 1967. The only thing keeping his first album, the only other album keeping his album from hitting number one, is a little thing by the Beatles called Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, which is, if you are at all familiar with rock history, is like pretty famous for like changing music history, right? A lot of people feel that way, that it like completely like music took a hard left turn whenever that album came out.
It's always the Beatles getting in the way.
I know. And Jimmy was ecstatic though, because it had a lot of the same psychedelic tones that he was experimenting with. And he was like, oh my God, the Beatles and me are like, we're racing towards the same soundscapes essentially. So he was like, he loved it. He loved it. In fact, they were doing a farewell England tour because he was getting ready to go finally try and come back to America and break out over here. Because at this point, his album came out and it was a number 2 hit, but just in England. America hasn't really heard of him unless they're like underground or something yet. So he does a farewell England concert. It's not a tour, rather. He's got two shows on like the same day on June 4th. And 30 minutes before the first show, and the Beatles and their manager are here in attendance. This is kind of like the one I said earlier, like a whole bunch of people, because they know Jimmy's about to go to America. We won't see him for a long time. A whole bunch of who's in the rock scene is here for these shows, including the Beatles. So like 30 minutes before the show, he takes the Beatles' new album back to the back room for his band. They listen to the titular song from the album for about 30 minutes, learn how to play it, and they come out and they play Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Heart Club Band live 3 days after the album had dropped, for the Beatles in attendance.
Wow.
And did it so well that after the show, they get invited to the Beatles' place, and Paul McCartney opens the door, offers him a joint, and says, "That was bloody well perfect, mate," or something like that. Just completely like gives him big ups for it because he said he killed it, right? So I just thought that was amazing that like he literally was so bold and ballsy to play.
I'm about to say, yeah, that takes some serious gumption to be like, I like this song so much, I'm gonna make it my own in front of you, and you're gonna like it.
In the book, Noel talks about whenever he first brought it back, he's like, I know what we're gonna open with. We're gonna open with this. And him and Mitch just looked at each other and looked at Jimmy and just asked them, bro, are you daft? Like, we can't, the Beatles are here, man. No, we can't do this. But they did it. It was great. And apparently he like closed the last song he played that show is like, thank you guys so much. I love London. You guys have my heart, but I'm going back home to America, and I don't know. It'll probably be a very, very long time before I come back. That's what he said, which would not be super true. He'd be back in like a year.
Oh, okay.
Mild spoilers. But he didn't know that, because at this point he really didn't know. He had found some success and fame in England, but he didn't know if he would be able to have that same reach and success in America. Enter the Monterey Pop Festival, which is several of the live songs on the playlist are from that. And he basically, the festival runners tried to get the Beatles to come play, but instead they got like just Paul McCartney as like kind of an overseer type. And Paul McCartney recommended like, hey, we got this cat. He's coming back over, Jimi Hendrix. You really need to have him come out. So they get him out there, and it was a coin toss. It came into a coin toss on who was going to go first, them or the Who. And it was like him and Pete Townshend, who had kind of become friends at that point, are doing the coin toss. And he like went off. Of course, the Who won because they were both like, we don't want to go like after you, because like Jimmy was known at this point for destroying his guitar and doing all these crazy, like humping his guitar against the amp on set and doing all this crazy, playing with his teeth. Yeah. Like the Who was kind of known for completely destroying their instruments, and like making a whole scene of that. So they were both like, we don't want to have to like one up you. Like that's tough to do. We'd rather go first. But the Who won, and so Jimmy was pretty livid that he had to go after him, which led to, he had done this a couple times in smaller shows, but never for such an audience. It led to him in the final video of the playlist where he sets his guitar on fire.
Guitar on fire. I saw that and I was like, what the hell? I was like, this motherfucker crazy.
Yes.
He set the guitar on fire and then smashed it and then threw bits and pieces of it into the crowd. I was like, you know what?
Yeah.
This man's a maniac.
And
in the best way.
The whole pop festival was filmed in like close to a year later was finally like, you could go out to the movie theaters and watch it. And that like really catapulted him once people like world or across the country rather got to like actually see that. But even immediately afterwards, like everyone that was there knew like, oh, this guy's a star. He's something else. We've never seen anything like him. Where is he going to go next?
Yeah, I do got thoughts about that audience, but we'll continue.
Okay. So much like the first album, the second album would also be kind of quickly recorded. Second album, of course, being Axis Bold as Love. The only thing that really slowed them down was I kept saying John Mayer. It's Roger Mayer. I'm so sorry.
Okay.
Roger Mayer is the guy.
Okay, all right. Because you said John Mayer, I'm thinking to myself, I was like, okay, I guess John Mayer was named after that John Mayer, I guess.
No, I don't know why. John Mayer. I've not even like listened to John Mayer, and I don't know how long. I don't know why that word this way in there. Roger Mayer is the guy's name. Apologies, Mr. Mayer. I don't know where you're at if you're listening, but if you're listening, I'm sorry. So his day job was like an acoustical analyst for the government, but he loved building effects for different musical artists. He had a few different connections like Jimmy Page and Jeff Beck that he was working for. But whenever he discovered Hendrix at the Bag of Nails, it was like Dr. Frankenstein finding his monster, kind of. One of the first big things he made for him was the Octavia, which was a device that could change the guitar notes an entire octave and was used pretty heavily on Purple Haze. So yeah, he would go on, like I said, Jimmy would go on to nickname Meyer the Valve and called him their secret weapon. Using his inventions along with commercially available stuff like the wah-wah or the fuzz face pedals, he was able to create sounds that just like no one was able to first figure out like how to use these devices to make them. But even if they had the devices, like he was using them in such creative ways, like even that itself was blowing people away.
Yeah, I was noticing that quite a bit. Like during the live performance, she was like messing with that the little pedal on the guitar and just going wow. I was like, oh,
the wah-wah pedal was I think invented not too long before he like really blew up. Like late 50s, early 60s, the wah-wah, or not wah-wah pedal, but the whammy bar was invented, which all of these were basically around the same time invented, like all with like late 50s, early 60s, right before he really blew up. So again, and a lot of the techniques he used, like the string bending and stuff, had been around for years at this point. Like blues, you hear it all the time in classic blues string bending, but no one, first of all, took it to the degree he would do. And then also it was just the culmination of everything, mixing the string bending with whammy bar while simultaneously hitting the wah-wah pedal with your foot. And then you're walking up to your huge stacks of amps you always have to get that feedback effect, and incorporating all of that into one pleasing sonic sound. It's just, no one was doing that at that time. No one knew how to do that at that time. It was otherworldly for people who had never heard anything like it. So yeah, they continue going. They come out with Axis Bold as Love, and he, at the time of it like coming out, he's doing like kind of a press tour. Has at this point he really starts to feel some issues with like some friction between him and his producers, which is another producer who's more like just over the money side of things, Michael Jeffries. I don't want to get into all that, but there's a lot of like conspiracy theories on how he was like controlling all the money and screwing over the band and everything. None of that is confirmed or denied one way or the other, so I didn't want to get into it. I figured I'd at least mention it off the cuff. So after they get done recording Axis Bold as Love, and basically at this point in his life, since he like came to America, his life has been just the same thing constantly over and over again. It's if he's not touring, he's in the studio recording. If he's not doing either of those things, he's probably with a groupie or groupies doing a bunch of drugs. Like that was literally the long and short of his life at that point. Of course, that's not totally true if you read the book. There's a lot more detail than that. There's little moments here and there that break up that, but that's by and large what most of his life is like. And he definitely starts feeling, there's several stories from friends and family that talk about him complaining of always being tired at this point. The drug use is really spiking to a crazy level as his fame continues, and he's constantly having just a whole horde of people, a whole gaggle of groupies and fans following him everywhere he goes, even into the studio sometimes, which creates friction with his bandmates. because they're trying to be serious musicians and they can't even get anything done because there's like groupies hanging all over them while they're trying to play. Can kind of take an issue. Of course, all this leads to, kind of jumping ahead a little bit, he had a few kind of big shows before this, but I think the show that kind of made him super famous was the Woodstock show in 1969. He was the highest paid performer and the closing act for the show, but the show was like, famously a 3-day long festival with like 500,000 people. And by the time the last day came around and the morning sun was coming up over the horizon and Jimmy was getting ready to take the stage, of those like 500,000 some odd people, only like 50,000 were left. So
okay,
yeah, most people had already like left like the night before for multitude of reasons. Probably because they'd been out there baking in the sun for 2 days straight and were kind of over it.
Yeah, like baked temperature and mentally.
And yes, all the drugs. The book talks about he pretty famously took, because there's like Kyle or Kenneth, whatever, some K name, but Owsley, I remember, or Owsley is like the famous, like he was the LSD producer, creator for the rock stars of this era. Like this was whenever it was like, quote unquote, the best it ever was, or whatever you hear people talk about.
Yeah.
So he comes backstage and hands, he's basically, this guy's just handing out tabs of acid to any and everybody. Yep. But he hands some to Jimmy and he waits, initially after getting it, he waits to take it where he is on the peak of his acid trip, right in the middle of his set, his Woodstock set, which once I read that, and then I went back to the playlist and I listened to some of the like solos he does. I was like, that kind of makes sense because those are otherworldly good.
Yep. And then watching his like face kind of like transcend, like his body was there, but like he just was in a whole other world. I was like, yeah. So yeah, I knew something was involved with all of that.
Yeah, he
something
was
extra, some kind of enhancement.
And that's not to mention, again, at this point, he's basically taking a pill to wake up, taking a pill to go to sleep, smoking copious amounts of marijuana all day, every day, in addition to everything else he's doing. Occasionally cocaine. I think very rarely, but there's a few times the book talks about how he would do heroin, usually by accident, but there was just so many people just passing drugs around willy-nilly that what apparently happened accidentally from time to time. But of course, all of that led to a pretty famous, I would say, well, I don't know, I might be biased in this, but I feel like a lot of people are at least somewhat familiar with his Star Spangled Banner. And also, I'm going to take a quick moment to just ask you what your thoughts on that whenever you first heard it on the playlist were. Okay,
so when it first came up, I was, I'm already jamming to listen to everything. And then that came on. I was like, oh, okay. I said, of course he would do the Star Spangled Banner. And then I'm listening to it. I'm like, okay, oh, say can. And then he starts going off and doing all the extra stuff. I was like, we can't just do nothing regular. Like, we got to be so extra in everything we do. So I was like, of course Jimmy would have a whole breakdown and just go and like he's doing like the equivalent of like doing all the extra runs and stuff that like, soul singers and stuff do. And then he'll jump back into the regular part and then continue and then go on and then like remix it some more. I was like, we just can't do nothing regular. So yeah, I mean, I was fine with it. It didn't bother me. I mean, yeah, it was interesting.
There was a lot of people who were bothered by it. Actually,
of course.
Got a lot because, of course, the Woodstock with the like counterculture movement and all that, and the free love movement and all that stuff. Like he got lumped in there with that, and his response was always like, "I'm an American. I love my country. Yeah. You don't have to love every part of your country to love your country. I wanted to play the song, so I played it, and I played it the way I know how." Like, he's like, I don't think, because like one person asked him, like, do you think that's offensive to Americans? He's like, I'm American. Yeah. How's it offensive? That's close to my heart. I'm playing it how I feel. Like, why are you asking me these questions this way? Like, and I respect that a lot.
Yeah, I respect that. And then also just, I guess, put in my mind what would be in that kind of time frame or whatever. Yeah, well, actually, unfortunately, now is okay. It's supposed to be in the future, but a lot of stuff is like past. It's a whole other topic.
Yeah,
but yeah, I can see some of the purists will have something to say about it. But that's with anything. Like people who want that old school or want that this is the way it was, this is the way it should be mentality. When you out here deviating from that, you're not you're part of the problem essentially.
Yeah.
So.
So that was a pretty famous moment where there's like they interviewed a few people that were at Woodstock whenever he first played the Star Spangled Banner, and there's like one of the stories that stuck with me was like the nurse who was in the like OD tent. Essentially, they called it something else, but basically people who were like overdosing, they had a medical tent just for that. She was in there working, and as soon as like the first couple of notes hit, she said that like literally everyone stopped what they were doing and just was like transfixed for the entirety of the song. And like for a lot of them, it was like the realization, like, or at least the nurse said it for her, at least that it was a realization like, oh, I can love my country, but like, like I just said, you don't have to love every aspect of it. You don't have to love the government and how they're doing everything. Like you can ask questions and raise concerns about what's going on and still love your country and where you're from.
Yeah.
So for specifically like the counterculture movement and the hippie, whatever you want to call it, of the late 60s, that was like a pivotal moment for people who were there live and who saw that. And again, whenever it was, because this was another show that was taped and like later on, months later, was played for audiences across the country that were able to see it. So during this time, going into late 69, going into 1970, he's working on his third album, Electric Ladyland, which once finished would go on to be his only number one album. Would also be his last studio album while he was alive. He records most of it in a new studio. I believe he named it like it's either Electric Land or he might have just named it straight up after the album Electric Ladyland Studios, but he had it built in like northern New York, so he spent most of his time there. So he has a few more big shows like Isle of Wight, I think in 1970. He plays in Maui. Is that where the version of Voodoo Child Slight Return I put on was from, I think.
Yeah, it was like
live in Maui. That was a whole like a whole movie filmed for that festival, essentially, that it was down in Maui. That was like super psychedelic, over the top, and they like showcased a bunch of not just musicians but also like painters and like other artists of different ilks. And well, I kind of skipped over, but he did have, of course, the big show, the big like double show at the Fillmore Arena, where The Power of Love and that Machine Gun that's on the playlist comes from, where he played basically his whole set on the 31st, December 31st, 1969, and they came back New Year's Day and like did the whole show again, right?
Oh, wow.
And it's funny because there's a famous story I saw, I forget which famous guitarist. He's connected to so many famous guitarists. It's hard for me to keep track of all of them. There was one that was talking about how like one of the producers at the like for the arena or whatever, who was kind of had seen Jimmy play a few times before, came down after his show the first night, and Jimmy was like, "Hey, how was that? Did you like it? What do you think?" And he was like, Jimmy, you're up here, you're doing all these things, man. You're humping your guitar and you're playing it behind your back and behind your head, and you're playing with your teeth, and like, yeah, that sounds good, but I just want to hear you play." And so he famously comes back the next night and essentially stands. He maybe moves a total of like 2 feet from where he stands, and he's just one with the guitar the whole night. And that's where the Power of Love and Machine Gun, like those versions of them, are my favorites, because it's just, I don't know, something different about them. Just, you can feel, at least I can feel whenever I listen to him, just how one with his guitar he was during those live versions of those songs.
Yeah, definitely Machine Gun. Like he goes off on that one, so hard on that one.
Which, speaking of Machine Gun, did you pick up the real life sounds he's emulating in that?
No, I didn't. What I missing?
So it's kind of hard, but there's of course parts of it where he's like doing the bunch of like vibrato and the like double notes is supposed to sound like Machine Gun fire. But the part, and I had known that for a long time, but the part that blew my mind reading the book and doing this research for this episode was there's a part where, if you remember, it's kind of, I don't like, maybe only like 4 or 5 minutes in or so. It's kind of like first part of the song where he just holds the really long high note, and it's like a squilling note that he holds for like 30 seconds, maybe a little bit longer than that. That's supposed to be an air siren.
Okay.
And as soon as I heard that and you go back and you listen, you're like, oh, okay, I hear it. Okay.
Yeah. Like I remember hearing that note, and I didn't catch the air siren part, but I was just like, "Why are you holding that note so long?" That's what I was kind of thinking to myself.
At that point, going into like 1970, I think he was kind of more like anti-war, more like didn't really see the point in it. But he was such like a non-confrontational type of person that if you like came at him a certain way, he would probably just agree with you to get you to shut up and not make a big deal about it.
I mean, either that or he'll try to fuck the shit out of you. One of the two.
One of the two, yeah. And it is funny you mentioned that because the book does talk about, again, this is where I was at the very top of the episode. I mentioned how the book is kind of outdated on its views on sexuality and stuff because it says that he might have been bisexual. And it's probably, he might have been, but just the tone of the book is a little bit more disparaging than I would like. But essentially, there's at least two separate semi-confirmed stories of him inviting a dude to join him, not just by himself, but with like other women for like threesomes or like a group sex activity or something. So yeah. I don't know. Jimmy, he's also totally coked up on drugs. Probably just like, hey, everyone get in here. You don't know what's happening. I don't know what was going through his mind, if those are even true or not, but
I mean, who knows?
I don't think it matters. I don't care one way or the other.
Yeah.
But yeah, so going into 70, he's still touring a lot, and his complaints, like he'd played a few shows in Seattle, like over the years or whatever, since he'd come back, and they always like kind of fell short of expectations. He always had this big idea of like a big homecoming show whenever he'd come back, and it just never was fully able to meet those grand expectations he had in his head. Mm-hmm. But every time he would like come back, especially like he came back near the end of his life here in 1970, he had a Seattle show, and like just spent a good long while just like driving through his neighborhoods, being nostalgic with like his aunt and cousins and stuff, and just complaining about how tired he was and how he wants to like escape. He feels like he's trapped in like his music, and like he owes it to his fans to always play the hits, but he wants to go and do these new things, and he doesn't want to be touring all the time, but he has to make money, and he's in these contracts, and he owes all these different people different things, and he's trying to just give them all what they need, but he is like basically just selling himself completely down to the bone to do all this. Which again, just compounds itself with more and more drug use. Like I said earlier, he told, I think like his aunt or his cousin or something, like summer of 1970, that he was taking a pill to wake up. He would be stoned all day on myriad substances, and then he had to take another pill to go to sleep. If he went to sleep at all, there were several times where he would stay up for 2, 3, 4 days at a time, which is not great.
Nope.
And of course, I didn't even get into it, but drinking was also something that was heavily done as well. And usually whenever he would drink copious amounts is whenever he would get violent. And he would really, it was a totally, everyone who said that they were around him whenever he would drink, it was a totally different Jimmy from the kind of introspective, demure, soft-spoken, kind of shy, funny guy they knew. You start drinking and he's throwing glass bottles at people's faces, and he's cussing them out and yelling and getting all up in their face and stuff.
Yeah. Drugs are bad.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, eventually at this point, he's not been with Kathy for some time. He's had a string of different, quote unquote girlfriends that he's been with, but due to infidelity or infidelity is probably the biggest reason, but there's other reasons too. If you want to get into his nitty gritty love life, the book has all that detail. But at the time of his death, he was with a new girl. She was a Dutch model that was kind of crazy from my reading, what I've been able to tell. She was basically like immediately telling everybody that her and Jimmy were engaged, even though Jimmy was like right next to her being like, no, we're not. So it kind of seems like she was, at least in this moment of time, was trying to put herself between Jimmy and all of his other friends and stuff. And so the night he passed, he was with her at her place, and she had like some like Dutch or German sleeping pills that were like way stronger than anything you would get in America. And Jimmy probably didn't know that, and he had, by all accounts, been up for like 3 days straight at this point, both like unable to sleep and like kind of going crazy from it. So it's suspected, of course we'll never know, because like a couple decades or like 10, 15 years after he passed, this girlfriend would end up killing herself. So we never really got the full true story from her before that. But it's suspected that he took like, a good handful of pills just to try and knock himself out and get some relief. However, a average dose for an adult was like half a pill. and he took like 9 or 10 pills. So he took like
jeez,
way over
serious overdose.
Yeah, and again, if she had passed out, she had taken a half a sleeping pill herself and passed out before him. If she had been awake, she might have been able to catch this. But basically, his body tried to expel tried to vomit up all the sleeping pills, and because of how he was laying, and because the sleeping pills were in his system and were keeping him knocked out, he basically drowned to death through asphyxiation of his own vomit. And that was on September 18th, 1970. He was just 40 days from turning 28.
Wow.
And
so
that
young.
was his career started in 67, really, whenever he, officially, like, as a big star, started in 67 when he made it to London. And before 1970 was done, he was passed away, and the world has not seen someone of his like since, I think.
Wow.
That went way longer than I thought it would. I just want to say right now that now that we're at the end, I still have like questions I wanted to ask you, man.
I mean, you still gonna ask away. I'll figure out how to chop this down. We may actually have our first 2-parter, legitimately, or just have a long ass episode. Fuck it, I don't know. We don't know. But yeah, just keep it going because like we got to talk about this stuff. Because I have thoughts.
Yeah. So what I want to know, just like, because I know, the whole reason I did this was you didn't really have experience, pun intended, listening to Jimi Hendrix before this. So like that first initial sit down and like listen to the playlist, I want to know what your kind of, if you can remember what your thoughts and feelings were.
My initial thought when I was getting into it, the first iteration of the playlist, it started off with "Hello Joe" or "Hey Joe." So
hello Joe.
I told you it's still in my head. So when I first heard this, I was like, okay, this is interesting. So I'm like, okay, kind of just getting into it, and then I heard the live version of it, and I would like to say that it makes me so proud that there is, other than like him, doing the solo things and just ripping and just having a good time, there's not a major significant difference between the live version and the studio version. And that makes me proud. Sometimes the live version sounds vastly different than the album version. And it was nice to hear that for the most part, he sounded the same and the band sounded the same.
Yeah, he was, I kind of left this out of the whole life story part, but he was like a known perfectionist in the studio. That also was a point of friction between him and his bandmates. Sometimes they would have like long sessions just working on one song because, this one little part just wasn't working just right. So I'm sure that definitely was carried over into his live shows as well.
100%. And I can neither confirm nor deny relating to being a perfectionist, especially when you're co-hosting a podcast with a buddy. Anyway, so but my initial feelings, dude. So I got halfway through the playlist because I was, listening to it for the first time. My initial reactions, I was like, "Oh, this is gonna be intense," because I was feeling things that I didn't necessarily think I was gonna feel, and then it gave me a chance to kind of listen to the lyrics because you forced me to listen to the lyrics now, so I'm paying attention to that. But then it was just a feeling, like just from the guitar, the vibrations, the bass, the whole feeling. And then with the mix between the studio and the live version, I felt like I was there, especially like the talking bits at the end, and, just the beginning part, saying like, hey, hold up a sec, we need to tune up our guitar right now, and key of F sharp. It's actually for our benefit, but also for your benefit as well. I appreciate y'all, So it's just like, it felt nice.
Yeah, I love those little moments too. There's one.
I love those moments. Those are great.
I forget which live song it is, but there's one where like he calls the crowd hard-headed. It's like,
yes.
How hard-headed. And then he starts playing. I think it might be Isabella.
It's Isabella.
It's those little, because, man, I agree with that. I love those little moments.
Yeah, because I was like, okay, this dude has a, he had a sense of humor. And that's the part about it now. Like, we're talking about music and I keep forgetting to use past tense because, he's long past, but just listening to his music now, it feels like he's still alive, if that makes any sense.
He would be in his, I looked it up. like last week, but he would be like 82 or something. He'd be in his 80s if he was still alive today.
Yeah, which is crazy because, like, I don't know, just when it comes to music and time, like, music is timeless in general. So,
and his music especially, man, like it's not to say no one since Jimi Hendrix has played the guitar like as well as he has. Like, it's not that, because there have been people that you could point at and say, oh, they're more technically proficient, or they're, you know, more nasty on the blues, but it's just something about, I mean, you really hit the nail on the head. He literally is putting, somehow you just feel it. He's putting his spirit into the music, and that comes out as you're listening to it and like connects to people and makes them like feel that even decades on, in a way that guitarists, and like for me at least, I've never heard another rock band that has had the same effect Jimi Hendrix and the Experience as a band have had on me. I've not had that same feeling.
It's like the marriage between the guitar and the drums, and then it really feels like, I guess, okay, I'm just gonna come out with it. It felt like the Black Church, more or less, you know, growing up in the deep South.
Vibe,
yeah. So that's the vibe I was getting on certain parts of the song, especially like towards the end, where the song is like, you know, you're supposed to wrap the song up, but he's like, nah, we're gonna keep this going a little bit.
Nah,
I ain't through yet. And drums start hitting that, like it kind of feel like shout music a little bit, and then going and watch the live concerts, which again, I had thoughts on that, and I'm about to share those now. It really irritates me when the crowd is not moving. Like, I was saying, I was like, get your asses up. They were sitting there. But
it was bothering me too, watching it. I don't understand why he's playing the craziest stuff you've ever heard in your life. And they're just like,
yep, just sit here. Not even doing that.
Nodding their head. If they're doing that. Most people are just
sit there just looking, or just like looking around, or just staring.
But there was that one dude in the middle who was like doing like the whole headbanging stuff too, and I was like, someone gets it. And it was funny because the guy's like actually sitting down next to that guy, are looking at him like, man, you're crazy. What are you doing? And he's like, he's feeling it.
Just hearing it, and for the first time, without knowing his whole origin story, I felt how bombastic he was. Like
he was from day one.
From day one. And I heard the different influences, and then when you brought up the Chitlin Circuit earlier, like Red House and the original Voodoo Chile, like I heard that, and I instantly heard that backwoods down home South blues.
Red House has like the most.
It's super bluesy.
I don't know. In my mind, you say blues, like the riff or the cadence or whatever. I don't feel like those are necessarily the right words, but like that's like such typical blues sounds to me. Like that's like that. It just, he took like the standard blues scale, or not scale, but like chord progression, I guess. Yeah, and just like, you know, he adds his own little guitar licks on top of it. But yeah, whenever literally you say blues, I'm hearing Red House play in my head, even if I'm not thinking of Jimi Hendrix at all in that moment. It's just, it's been that way since I was a kid and I first heard the song and like connected it to blues.
Yeah, and I was literally just thinking about BB King and all of them, and then you mentioned them in the story. I was just like, okay. So yeah, so Red House and the original version of Voodoo Chile. Not Child, Voodoo Chile. That one, I when you snuck that one on there, I was listening to that. I was like, hold up, where does pop up? And I was just like, okay. I was like, okay.
Well,
so I was feeling that one.
The Slight Return version is, I think, the more famous, possibly more well loved, mainly just because it's more compact, 5 minutes versus 15 minutes.
Yeah.
That's my theory, at least. I feel like there's a lot of ground I can stand on to say that.
Well, I mean, well, the lengthwise for sure, but then also the Slight Return is definitely more up tempo. Whereas
it's more up tempo and a little bit more like catchy.
It's more rocky. It has more rock influence. Whereas the original Voodoo Chile is definitely more blues driven for sure.
100%. Did you have a favorite? Out of both studio, live, whatever the version may be, did you have a favorite off the playlist?
Yeah, so my favorites are Voodoo Chile, the original, and Voodoo Chile Slight Return. Love both of those.
Slight Return is probably mine.
I definitely like those.
Wow, 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 wow.
Yeah, Little Wing from before when we had it on the previous one.
I almost didn't put it just because it was on the previous one, but Little Wing is probably it. I go back and forth on any given day, but most days I would say Little Wing is probably my favorite song by him.
Yeah.
And the Royal Albert Hall performance is probably, in my opinion, because I've listened to a bunch of the different live versions of Little Wing. I think it's my favorite. It's so good.
Yeah.
It's so good.
Yeah, I'm a fan.
That like extended solo in the middle is just, oh man.
Yeah.
Chef kiss.
I was very happy to get a longer version of that song.
Yes, I was very happy to give it.
Castles Made of Sand and Manic Depression.
You like Manic Depression? Yes.
Yeah. I mean,
because that's one of his like lesser.
Real.
That's not one of his like bigger hits, and that's off his first album. Whenever he was like literally writing like a song a night, or like every other day, right? And he's just hammering it. He's just like his hand and pen were on fire as he's writing all these songs for that first Are You Experienced album. So like, again, like I said, like Chad's like, write what you know. So like this came from the heart, and like you said, it's real. And it's something that like I feel like you don't get a lot of songs from the 60s from that era talking about depression in any sense.
You may get it, but like they'll try to be more philosophical or around the box with it. But this is like straight to the point.
It's a frustrating mess. Like exactly. it's I have to untangle my life because of this. And he did talk. I don't know if he was ever diagnosed with manic depression, but he did talk about in a lot of interviews, probably because of his rampant drug use. I'm sure had a play in a mental state. But he talked about being depressed quite often.
I mean, clearly, like, me playing armchair psychiatrist based on an autobiography that you broke down to me. He had so many signs of like obsessiveness and being bombastic and being unruly and just
and the troubled childhood and poverty all of his life. Like I was going to say, the book makes a great point to say that like while for the artistic endeavor of becoming a great guitarist, that's like almost like storybook. Telling like, oh, he never actually worked an actual job a day in his life. He only was focused on the musician. And that is like a romanticized like idea of like being a guitarist or whatever. But the book makes a great point to prove or to point out that he was only able to survive during this period through the generosity of others.
Yeah. I mean,
like that's one thing, it's just something to keep in mind. It's like if you're putting it all into something and you're not actually working, like you will have to have help.
I mean, for sure. Yeah, definitely.
And he was just blessed enough to have, impress people enough along the way and make connections enough along the way that he did survive to get to where he did.
Yeah, absolutely. You definitely gotta, lean on others and also have to know how to network and learn how to talk to people and just not be an asshole. And, and also understand your limits. But at the same time, you still got to bet on yourself. So, and for him to constantly bet on himself and to fail so many times to end up winning for the last 4 or 5 years of his life. I mean, granted, it was a short-lived life because 28 is like way too young, but 27, was way too young. But all those hard times weren't for naught. So
no, they definitely forged him into the person and musician he would, go on to be for sure.
Yeah.
He was a quiet, gentle, loving human being behind stage, but as soon as he got up on that stage with a guitar in his hand, that switch was flipped. He was the biggest performer of the day, right?
Yeah. He's loving and caring. Just don't ask him for an autograph in the bathroom.
I mean, he's going the extra mile and showing you how much he loves you. What are you talking about?
Can I get an autograph? Oh! No, but I mean, like overall, like I mean, it's I don't know. Like now that I know the full story, like part of me is like happy and also like a lot of me is sad because it's like damn, because like it's unfortunate that how can I put it? It just feels like when you are gifted with so much talent and so much skill that you tend to start off rough, then you finally become that diamond, and then it just for some reason it doesn't always happen, but a lot of times when you become that diamond and then you get to shine for like maybe 1 or 2 years, and then after that it's like you just short circuit and just fizzle out and just and I mean just like overall when you think of like the greats, you think of like the Amy Winehouses, you think about the Aaliyahs, you think about the Jimmys of the world. It's like there's so many people that you see coming up that have so much talent and so much promise, and you just see them like go through like a crazy decline. It just I don't know why that is. It just sucks, but it just makes me wonder what if somebody were to intervene and be like, hey, cool off with the drugs, or
yes.
or just like, hey, you might need to sober up, or maybe take a break for a little bit and then come back. I mean, we all can butterfly effect this thing to death or multiverse and shit, but it is humbling and just disheartening at the same time to realize that this man had this much talent and
he had so much still left to give. So I feel like it'd be incorrect to say he started the 27 Club, because I think there were people that are like in the 27 Club that like passed before him. Are you aware? I should maybe outline what the infamous 27 Club is. Just a list of a bunch of different, mainly musicians, but also actors and just other famous artists and different people like that of fame that have died at the age of 27. Usually due to, of course, because that's a pretty young age, to some traumatic type of death, whether it's, a crazy accident or a drug overdose or something like that. There's a lot of people on that list, and most people, of course, at 27, every single person on that list, without a doubt, still had more to give, probably, I'm assuming, artistically or whatever they were, whatever their field was. But out of all of them, man, Jimmy has always felt like, to me, he had still the most to give. He had so much more to give, dude. He had so many like unfinished songs and like bits and pieces of songs that he had recorded. Like he mentioned, like after Electric Ladyland came out, that he had enough to do like another 3-4 albums that were like as long as like a triple album at the time. So he had just a whole host of songs, or at least at the very least ideas for songs and like compositions and stuff in his head that he could have, if he had stayed alive, he could have continually, I think, like changed the course of music history if he had. And that really gives me, I had to look it up. I made a note of it. There's a word, anemoia.
Okay. What does that mean?
It's a sense of longing or yearning for something that never happened. Because after I finished the biography and I locked my phone because I was reading it on my phone. After I closed my phone and I set it down after I read the last page, I had this intense feeling of just like, what if he had not passed away when he did so young? What would the music world, what would it look like? And what would, how would that change everything as I know it musically? And that just thinking about that just gave me such a deep sense of loss for a moment, at least.
Yeah. So that's the same feeling I'm experiencing right now in real time.
It's also related to, like you said earlier, missing out on like not. It can also apply to like if something happened like before your time that you like could have never experienced, but you just missed because you were born a long time or whatever. It can kind of apply to that. So it also is that, I'll never get to see Jimi Hendrix live, and that makes me really bummed, man. It really bums me out. I'll never get to feel his playing in my chest like that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I totally get that, man. It just sucks. I mean, again, to lose a talent so young, so early.
But again, that's like you were saying, we could sit here and play What If all day, every day. But he was definitely, though I'm not like a practicing guitar player today, I've kind of set it down as an adult. Growing up, I played it, because my dad's a guitarist. I played for several years. Jimi Hendrix, outside of my own father, is the biggest influence I had in picking up the guitar. Bar no one else came even close to like convincing me, I want to pick up the guitar and learn how to play. I want to sound like that. It's my dad, because I would hear him play literally every day, all day. Not all day, but I would hear him play like, all the time. And then Jimi Hendrix. So yeah, it definitely holds a special place in my heart. And I am excited that I finally got to share that with you and with everyone else who's listening.
Yeah. I'm glad to finally check this off my list and filling up a huge gap of my music knowledge that was apparently missing and should have been there, because I thoroughly enjoyed all of it. If you feel the same way, feel free to shout us out. You can catch us online. Our social media links and previous episodes and previous playlists are all available on afterplaylist.com. And if you want to support us directly, you can always go to our Patreon, which is patreon.com/afterplaylist. Don't forget to play, share, play again, share again this music playlist and this episode with your friends, family, and whoever else that, you know, is a fan of Jimi Hendrix or should be a fan of Jimi Hendrix. Or
everyone should be.
Everybody should be. I mean, or just, non-consensual Jimi Hendrix. I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
Just put the playlist on, just force them to listen to it and become a fan. Until next time, keep on listening. Bye.
Bye.
Black Giraffe made this.